December 12th, 2003. Somerset Medical Center, New Jersey. A nurse walks quietly down a dimmed hospital corridor. His shift is nearly over. Just one more patient to check on. Room 512. An elderly man, recovering from heart surgery. Stable condition. Expected to go home in 2 days. The nurse enters. He's done this thousands of times. The routine is familiar, comforting even. He checks the IV drip, adjusts the flow rate. The patient is sleeping. Good. From his pocket, the nurse removes a small vial. Digoxin, a heart medication. Perfectly normal to see in a cardiac unit. But this patient isn't prescribed digoxin. The nurse draws the medication into a syringe. His hands don't shake. They never do. He's practiced. Very practiced. He injects the digoxin directly into the IV line. The clear liquid flows into the patient's bloodstream. The nurse disposes of the syringe in the sharps container. He makes a note on the chart. Routine vitals check. Everything normal. He leaves the room. The patient is still sleeping. 20 minutes later, alarm sound. Code blue. Room 512. Doctors and nurses rush in. The patient is in cardiac arrest. They try to revive him. Medications. Chest compressions. Defibrillator. Nothing works. Time of death. 11:47 p.m. The family is devastated. But the doctors explain heart surgery is risky. Sometimes patients don't make it, even when everything seems fine. These things happen. The nurse who gave that final injection? He's already clocked out. He's driving home. He'll be back tomorrow for another shift. This is Charles Cullen. And what you just heard? It wasn't his first time, or his 100th. It was somewhere around number 400. Chapter 2. The Boy Who Wanted to Help. Charles Edmund Cullen was born February 22nd, 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey. He was the youngest of 8 children. His father, a bus driver, died when Charles was only 7 months old. His mother had to raise 8 kids alone during the 1,960 seconds. It wasn't easy. Charles was a quiet child, withdrawn. He preferred being alone. Other kids found him strange. He didn't play sports. He didn't have many friends. But he was smart, very smart. He read constantly. Books about science, medicine, biology. While other boys played baseball, Charles was reading about human anatomy. His childhood wasn't happy. That much is clear from later interviews. He claimed there was abuse in the home, though the details remain murky. His siblings have mostly refused to speak publicly about their family life. What we know for certain is that Charles's mother died when he was 17. A car accident. Suddenly, the boy who was already withdrawn from the world became even more isolated. He tried to kill himself for the first time at age 9. Pills from the medicine cabinet. He survived. His family didn't get him psychiatric help. In the 1,960 seconds, mental health wasn't discussed. You dealt with your problems privately. He tried again at 17, shortly after his mother's death. Another suicide attempt, another survival. Still, no real intervention. Charles Cullen was drowning, but on the surface, he looked fine. He graduated high school. He needed direction, purpose, something to give his life meaning. He decided to join the Navy. Chapter 3. The Submarine. Charles Cullen enlists in the United States Navy. He's 18 years old. Maybe the military will give him structure, discipline, a sense of belonging he's never felt. The Navy assigns him to submarine duty. USS Woodrow Wilson, a ballistic missile submarine, one of the most prestigious and demanding assignments in the Navy. But Charles doesn't handle it well. Submarine life is claustrophobic. You're underwater for months at a time. No sunlight, no privacy. You're surrounded by the same men, day after day, in a metal tube beneath the ocean. For someone already struggling with mental health issues, it's a nightmare. Charles begins exhibiting strange behavior. He's caught wearing a surgical mask and gloves for no reason. He's found in unauthorized areas of the submarine. He keeps to himself, which is normal enough, but there's something off about him that the other sailors notice. Then, things escalate. Charles breaks into the drug locker. He steals medications. When confronted, he can't explain why. He's transferred off the submarine. The Navy tries to figure out what to do with him. Psychiatric evaluations. But this is 1,980. The military doesn't have great mental health resources, and Charles is good at hiding his problems when he needs to. Then comes another suicide attempt. He's found unconscious after overdosing on medications he stole. This time, the Navy has had enough. Medical discharge. After less than 3 years of service, Charles Cullen is out. He returns to New Jersey. No job. No real skills, except what the Navy taught him. No support system. But during his time in the service, he discovered something. He'd received some medical training, basic first aid, emergency response, and he'd been fascinated by it. He decides to become a nurse. Chapter 4. Nursing School. Charles Cullen enrolls in nursing school at Mountainside Hospital School of Nursing in Montclair, New Jersey. He's 24 years old, starting over. Maybe this is his chance to finally do something good with his life. Nursing appeals to him for several reasons. It's a helping profession. He'll be caring for people, saving lives, making a difference. There's also the practical consideration: male nurses are in demand. The profession is dominated by women, and hospitals actively recruit men. Job security is virtually guaranteed. Charles excels in his studies. He's intelligent, focused, and he has a genuine interest in medicine. His instructors note that he's knowledgeable and capable. A bit quiet, maybe. Socially awkward, but competent. He particularly enjoys learning about medications, pharmacology, understanding how drugs interact with the human body, what they do, how they work, the precise dosages required, what happens when you give too much. His classmates remember him as odd, but harmless. He doesn't socialize much. He doesn't go to parties or study groups, but he's polite, helpful when asked questions. No one sees any red flags. During clinical rotations, Charles works in various hospital departments. He sees patients die. It's part of healthcare. Death is inevitable, especially in hospitals where the sickest people end up. But Charles seems unusually interested in the dying process. He volunteers for the shifts no one else wants, night shifts, when patients are most likely to deteriorate. When asked why, he says someone has to do it. In 1987, Charles Cullen graduates. He's now a registered nurse, licensed by the state of New Jersey, trusted by the medical community, given access to vulnerable patients and powerful medications. He gets married that same year, a woman he met through mutual acquaintances. It seems like Charles is finally getting his life together, but something is already wrong. Something that no one sees yet. Chapter 5. The First Hospital. June 1987. Street Barnabas Medical Center, Livingston, New Jersey. Charles Cullen's first job as a registered nurse. The burn unit, one of the most challenging and emotionally demanding areas of nursing. Burn victims suffer tremendously. The pain is excruciating. The treatments are agonizing. Many don't survive. It's heartbreaking work that requires enormous emotional resilience. Charles requests the night shift. He says he prefers it. Less supervision, quieter, more time to focus on patient care. His supervisors agree. Night shift nurses are hard to find. If Charles wants it, he can have it. For the first few months, everything seems fine. Charles is quiet but competent. He does his job. No complaints. Then, patients start dying. Not unusual in a burn unit, of course. Burn victims have high mortality rates. But there's a pattern emerging that one of the other nurses notices. Judge John Yengo Sr. is a patient in the burn unit. Elderly man. Severe burns. But he's stable. Expected to survive with proper care. Charles is assigned to his care. Judge Yengo dies unexpectedly. Cardiac arrest. The family is devastated but accepts the explanation, complications from his injuries. Then another patient. Then another. A colleague starts noticing something strange. These patients are dying on Charles's shifts. More deaths than usual. And they're sudden deaths. Cardiac arrests in patients who seem stable. The nurse reports her concerns to management. Street Barnabas investigates. They review patient charts. They notice something alarming. Medications are going missing. Specifically, digoxin, a heart medication that, in large doses, causes cardiac arrest. They check the medication logs. Someone has been accessing digoxin without proper authorization. The access codes trace back to Charles Cullen. Hospital security searches Charles's locker. They find empty medication vials. No legitimate reason for him to have them. But here's where the story takes its first critical turn. Street Barnabas doesn't call the police. They don't report Charles to the state nursing board. They don't alert other hospitals. Instead, they quietly force Charles to resign. March 1992. They tell him to leave and never come back. Why would a hospital do this? Liability. If Street Barnabas admits they employed a nurse who was killing patients, they'll face massive lawsuits. Their reputation will be destroyed. Insurance premiums will skyrocket. It's easier to just make the problem go away quietly. Charles signs the resignation papers. He agrees to leave voluntarily. Street Barnabas gives him a neutral reference. They confirm his employment dates, but offer no details about why he left. And just like that, Charles Cullen is free to work at another hospital, which is exactly what he does. Chapter 6. Hospital Number 2, May 1992. Warren Hospital, Phillipsburg, New Jersey. Charles Cullen applies for a nursing position. He provides Street Barnabas as a reference. When Warren Hospital calls, Street Barnabas confirms he worked there, but offers no additional information. Warren Hospital hires him. Night shift. Intensive care unit. Charles is thrilled. The ICU gives him even more access to critically ill patients and powerful medications. His pattern continues. But now, he's more careful, more subtle. He learns from his mistakes at Street Barnabas. He doesn't access medications using his own codes as frequently. Instead, he finds workarounds. He memorizes other nurses' access codes by watching them type. He takes medications during shift changes when no one's paying close attention. Patients die. But in an ICU, patients die all the time. These are the sickest people in the hospital. Death is expected. Charles works at Warren Hospital for 3 years. During this time, His personal life is falling apart. His marriage is failing. His wife says he's emotionally distant, cold, uninterested in their family life. They have 2 daughters now, but Charles seems disconnected from them. His wife doesn't know it yet, but Charles is also burning down homes. Not their home, other people's homes. He sets small fires, never anything that kills anyone, just property damage. When later asked why, he can't give a clear answer. The fires made him feel something. Control, perhaps. Power. He's also overdosing on medications. Suicide attempts, though he survives them all. He's hospitalized multiple times for psychiatric issues. Yet somehow, Warren Hospital doesn't connect any of this to his job performance. He keeps showing up for his shifts. He keeps having access to patients. Then in 1993, something happens that should have stopped Charles Cullen forever. A Warren Hospital patient dies unexpectedly. Helen Dean, elderly woman, in for routine treatment. She was doing fine. Then suddenly, cardiac arrest, dead. One of the nurses remembers seeing Charles in her room shortly before she died. The nurse reports it to a supervisor. Warren Hospital investigates. They find that Charles accessed medications he had no reason to access. They find irregularities in patient charts. And here's the truly shocking part. They contact Street Barnabas to ask about Charles's time there. Street Barnabas finally admits that Charles was forced to resign due to suspicious patient deaths and medication theft. So now Warren Hospital knows. They have confirmation from his previous employer that Charles Cullen is dangerous. What do? They make him resign. Just like Street Barnabas. Quietly. No police report. No nursing board notification. They tell Charles to leave, and they'll provide a neutral reference. Charles signs the papers. August 1993. He's unemployed again. But only briefly. Chapter 7. The system fails. Here's what should have happened in 1993. Warren Hospital should have called the police. Charles should have been arrested and investigated for murder. Evidence should have been gathered. If convicted, he'd go to prison. At minimum, Warren Hospital should have reported Charles to the New Jersey Board of Nursing. His license should have been suspended pending investigation. He should never have been allowed to work as a nurse again. But neither of these things happened. Why? Because hospitals have a powerful incentive to keep quiet about problem employees. It's called liability. If a hospital admits they employed someone who harmed patients, they open themselves up to massive lawsuits. Every family of every deceased patient can sue, and they'll win. Because the hospital knew, or should have known, that their employee was dangerous. The financial consequences would be catastrophic. Millions in settlements, increased malpractice insurance premiums, damaged reputation leading to loss of patients and revenue. It's cheaper and easier to just make the problem go away quietly. Force the employee to resign. Don't admit wrongdoing. Don't report to authorities. Hope the problem doesn't follow you. This happens more often than you'd think. It's called passing the trash. A bad employee is quietly pushed out, and they become someone else's problem. The American healthcare system had and still has no mandatory reporting system for dangerous healthcare workers. Hospitals aren't legally required to report suspected crimes by employees to law enforcement. They're not required to report to state licensing boards unless there's a criminal conviction. This creates a system where dangerous people can move from hospital to hospital, leaving a trail of victims. And no one connects the dots because no one is sharing information. Charles Cullen understood this instinctively. He knew that as long as he resigned before being formally fired, he could get another job, and the hospitals would play along because it protected them from liability. So that's exactly what he did. Again and again. Chapter 8. Hospital Number 3, October 1993. Hunterdon Medical Center, Flemington, New Jersey. Charles applies for a nursing position. He lists Warren Hospital as his previous employer. When Hunterdon calls for a reference, Warren confirms employment dates and says nothing about the circumstances of his departure. Hunterdon hires Charles. Night shift. Critical care unit. By now, Charles has been killing for over 6 years. He's refined his method. He knows which drugs to use, how much, how to access them without raising red flags, how to choose victims who won't be suspicious elderly patients, very sick patients, people expected to die anyway. His weapon of choice is digoxin. It's a heart medication commonly used in hospitals. It's not unusual to see it being administered. In therapeutic doses, it helps regulate heart rhythm. In toxic doses, it causes cardiac arrest. Digoxin is perfect for Charles's purposes because it's hard to detect in standard autopsies. Unless doctors are specifically looking for it, they won't find it. And why would they look for it? These patients have heart problems. Heart medications are expected. Charles also uses insulin, another common hospital medication, easy to access. In large doses, it causes blood sugar to drop fatally low. Again, not something that shows up clearly in routine autopsies. At Hunterdon Medical Center, patients begin dying on Charles's shifts. But ICU patients die all the time. Nobody notices a pattern. Or if they do, they don't report it. Charles works at Hunterdon for about a year. During this time, his personal life continues deteriorating. His wife files for divorce. She can't handle his behavior anymore. The emotional distance, the suicide attempts, the general strangeness. Charles doesn't fight the divorce. He moves into a basement apartment, lives alone, works his night shifts, kills patients. In late 1994, something happens at Hunterdon that raises concerns. Several patients die unexpectedly in a short period, all on Charles's shifts. A nurse reports her suspicions to management. She's noticed Charles accessing medications oddly, going into patient rooms when he's not assigned to those patients. Hunterdon investigates. They find irregularities, medication discrepancies, but nothing definitive, nothing they can prove conclusively. They talk to Charles. He denies everything. He says he's just doing his job. The deaths are coincidental. These patients were very sick. Hunterdon has a choice. They can report their suspicions to police and risk the liability exposure, or they can encourage Charles to resign. Guess what they choose? January 1995. Charles Cullen leaves Hunterdon Medical Center. Voluntary resignation. Neutral reference provided. 3 hospitals. 3 resignations. No criminal record. No suspended license. Charles is free to kill again. Chapter 9. Morristown. 1. March 1995. Morristown Memorial Hospital, Morristown, New Jersey. This hospital is larger, more prestigious, better pay. Charles is moving up in his career despite being a serial killer. He's assigned to the intensive care unit. Night shift, as always. Morristown Memorial is a busy hospital. The ICU is constantly full. Patients are critically ill. The staff is overworked and understaffed, especially at night. This is the perfect environment for Charles. Less supervision, more chaos. Easier to go unnoticed. He works at Morristown for about a year. During this time, he kills multiple patients. We don't know exactly how many. He later claimed he couldn't remember. The numbers blur together. What we do know is that in 1996, something happens that should have ended Charles Cullen's nursing career forever. A patient receives an unauthorized dose of medication and nearly dies. The patient survives, but barely. The incident is reported. Morristown investigates. They trace the medication administration to Charles. When confronted, he admits to giving the medication, but claims it was a mistake. He mixed up patients. He thought he was supposed to give it. It's a flimsy excuse. Nurses don't just accidentally inject random patients with powerful drugs. But Charles is calm, apologetic, and the patient survived. So maybe it really was just a terrible mistake. Morristown decides not to file criminal charges, but they do suspend Charles temporarily while they investigate further. During the investigation, they contact his previous employers. They learn about the suspicious circumstances at his prior hospitals. They realize they have a pattern. Finally, Morristown does something the other hospitals didn't. They report Charles to the New Jersey Board of Nursing. This is it. This should be the moment Charles Cullen's killing spree ends. The nursing board opens an investigation. They review his employment history. They interview staff from multiple hospitals. The evidence is damning. But then, something happens that defies belief. The investigation stalls. Hospitals refuse to fully cooperate. They're worried about liability. They won't provide detailed records. They won't confirm suspicions. Everything is vague and protected by hospital legal departments. Without full cooperation from the hospitals, the nursing board can't build a strong case. They have suspicions, but not proof. Suspicions aren't enough to permanently revoke a nursing license. In the end, the nursing board suspends Charles's license temporarily. They require him to undergo psychiatric evaluation and substance abuse counseling. They put him on probation, but they don't permanently revoke his license, and they don't report him to law enforcement as a suspected serial killer. After completing the required counseling and serving his suspension, Charles gets his nursing license back, full active status, legal to work, and he immediately starts applying for nursing jobs again. Chapter 10. Liberty. Nursing Home. 1996 to 1998. Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, Allentown, Pennsylvania. Charles crosses state lines. Maybe New Jersey is too hot. Too many people asking questions. Pennsylvania is a fresh start. He gets hired at Liberty, a nursing home. The residents here are elderly, frail, and expected to die. It's the perfect cover. Charles later admits he killed patients at Liberty, but he can't remember how many. The number is somewhere between 5 and 10, maybe more. Nursing home deaths rarely trigger investigations. These are old people at the end of their lives. When they die, it's sad, but expected. Families grieve, but don't demand autopsies. Deaths are signed off as natural causes. Charles works at Liberty for about 2 years. During this time, he's increasingly unstable. He attempts suicide multiple times. He's hospitalized for psychiatric issues. He tells therapists he wants to die, but somehow he keeps his job. The nursing home knows he's mentally ill, but they don't connect his mental illness to potential danger to residents. In 1998, Charles applies for a job at another Pennsylvania hospital, Easton Hospital. He gets hired. He quits Liberty Nursing Home. More patients will die. Chapter 11. Easton Hospital, 1,998 to 2,002. Easton Hospital, Easton, Pennsylvania. This is where Charles Cullen reaches his peak. 4 years at one hospital. More access. More victims. He's hired into the critical care unit. Night shift. The hospital is happy to have him experienced ICU nurse. Good references. Willing to work nights. Charles is now in his late 30s. He's been killing for over a decade. He's comfortable with it. It's become routine. He later describes his mindset during this period. He wasn't angry at the patients. He didn't hate them. He told himself he was helping them, ending their suffering. They were sick. They were in pain. And he was giving them mercy. This is how he justified it to himself. He was an angel of death, a mercy killer. But that's not really true. And deep down, Charles knows it, because many of his victims weren't suffering. Many were expected to recover fully. They had families waiting for them, lives to return to. Charles was killing because he liked it. The power, the control, playing God, deciding who lives and who dies. During his time at Easton, Charles kills dozens of patients. We'll never know the exact number. He later confessed to about 40 during this period, but investigators suspect more. His method is always the same. Wait until night. Wait until the patient is alone. Inject digoxin or insulin into the IV line. Leave. The patient dies within minutes to hours. Cardiac arrest. Natural causes. Sometimes he stays and watches. Sometimes he's the one who discovers the body and calls the code. He participates in the resuscitation attempts, knowing they'll fail because he's the one who caused the arrest in the first place. The other nurses at Easton start noticing. More deaths than usual on night shift. More cardiac arrests. Always when Charles is working. One nurse in particular, a woman we'll call Sarah, becomes suspicious. She keeps informal notes. She tracks which nights Charles works and which nights patients die unexpectedly. The correlation is obvious. Sarah reports her concerns to management. She shows them her notes. She says something is wrong. They need to investigate. Easton Hospital Administration takes her seriously. They start their own internal investigation. They review medication logs. They find discrepancies. Medications accessed when they shouldn't be. Patterns of access linked to Charles. They also discover something disturbing. They contact Charles's previous employers in New Jersey. They learn about the suspensions and investigations. They realize they've hired a nurse who was under suspicion at multiple hospitals. Why didn't this show up in his background check? Because no one reported him to the National Practitioner Data Bank, a federal database designed to track problem healthcare workers. Hospitals are supposed to report practitioners who are disciplined, but reporting is inconsistent. Easton now knows they have a problem, a big problem. But like every hospital before them, they don't call the police immediately. First, they confront Charles. They bring him into an office. They show him the evidence, the medication logs, the pattern of deaths. Charles denies everything. He says the deaths are coincidental. These patients were very sick. He didn't do anything wrong, but his denials are weak. He's clearly lying. Hospital administrators can see it. Finally, they give him an ultimatum. Resign now, or they'll report this to authorities and revoke his access immediately. Charles chooses to resign. October 2002. But this time, something different happens. This time, one of the Easton Hospital administrators decides to do the right thing. She calls the Pennsylvania State Police. Chapter 12. The investigation begins. October 2002. Pennsylvania State Police receive a call from Easton Hospital. The hospital reports suspicions about Charles Cullen, a former nurse, possible patient harm, multiple suspicious deaths, medication irregularities. The police open an investigation. This is complex. These deaths happened over 4 years. Many victims have already been buried. Evidence is scarce. Detectives start interviewing staff at Easton. They review patient records. They subpoena medication logs. The interviewing staff at Easton. They review patient records. They review patient records. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Patients died on Charles' shifts at a rate significantly higher than statistical norms. Medications went missing when Charles was working. He accessed patient files he had no legitimate reason to access. But circumstantial evidence isn't enough for murder charges. They need proof, hard evidence, confessions, witnesses. The detectives realize they need to track Charles's entire employment history. If he was killing at Easton, he was probably killing at his previous jobs too. They contact hospitals in New Jersey. They learn about Street Barnabas, Warren Hospital, Hunterdon, Morristown, Liberty Nursing Home. Every hospital has the same story. Suspicious deaths, medication discrepancies, forced resignation, no police report. The detectives are stunned. This pattern has been going on for 15 years. Multiple hospitals knew or suspected, and no one reported it to law enforcement. How many people has Charles Cullen killed? They don't know yet, but it's a lot. Meanwhile, Charles has no idea he's under investigation. He thinks he's gotten away with it again. Just like every other time, he needs a new job. He applies at Somerset Medical Center in New Jersey. Despite everything, despite being forced to resign from multiple hospitals, despite the suspension from the nursing board, Somerset hires him. How? Because none of the previous hospitals will confirm why he left. Neutral references only. No details. Somerset has no idea what they're hiring. December 2002. Charles Cullen starts working at Somerset Medical Center. He immediately resumes killing. Chapter 13. The Reverend. December 2003. Somerset Medical Center. Reverend Florian Gall is a patient, Catholic priest, elderly but healthy for his age. He's in the hospital recovering from heart surgery. The surgery went well. He's expected to make a full recovery and return to his parish. Charles Cullen is assigned to his care. On December 11th, Reverend Gall is doing fine. Sitting up, talking to family, eating, all vital signs stable. That night, Charles enters his room. He injects digoxin into the IV line. Within an hour, Reverend Gall is in cardiac distress, code blue. Doctors rush in. They try to save him, but can't. He dies. The family is devastated. The parishioners are heartbroken. But the doctors explain complications from surgery. These things happen, even when everything seems fine. The funeral is held. Reverend Gall is buried. But something happens that doesn't usually happen. The hospital's pharmacy notices something wrong. They're doing a routine audit of medication records. They notice that digoxin was accessed for Reverend Gall's room, but Reverend Gall wasn't prescribed digoxin. There's no doctor's order for it. Someone gave him medication he wasn't supposed to receive. The pharmacy reports this to hospital administration. Somerset investigates. They check the access logs. The digoxin was accessed using Charles Cullen's login credentials. Somerset contacts the other hospitals where Charles worked. They learn what Pennsylvania police already know: Charles Cullen is suspected of killing patients at multiple hospitals. Somerset immediately reports this to New Jersey State Police. Now, 2 state police agencies are investigating Charles Cullen, Pennsylvania and New Jersey. They coordinate. They share information. They realize they need to act fast. Charles is currently working at Somerset. He has access to patients right now. Every day they wait, more people might die. But they still don't have enough evidence for an arrest. They need more. They need a confession. The detectives come up with a plan. Chapter 14. The Interrogation. December 12th, 2003. Late evening. Charles Cullen finishes his shift at Somerset Medical Center. He walks to his car in the parking lot. Detectives are waiting. They approach him. They identify themselves. They ask if he'll come to the station to answer some questions about medication discrepancies at the hospital. Charles could refuse. He could ask for a lawyer. He could invoke his Fifth Amendment rights. But he doesn't. He agrees to come with them. Why? Maybe he's tired. Maybe he wants to confess. Maybe he thinks he can talk his way out of it, like he has before. They drive him to police headquarters. They bring him into an interrogation room. They read him his Miranda rights. Again, Charles waives his right to an attorney. He says he'll talk. The detectives start gently. They talk about his nursing career, his moves between hospitals. They say they're just trying to understand what happened. Charles is calm, cooperative. He answers questions. Yes, he worked at all those hospitals. Yes, there were medication issues, but he didn't do anything wrong. The detectives press harder. They mention specific patients, specific dates. They show him medication logs with his access codes. Charles starts to crack. His story changes. He admits he accessed medications he shouldn't have, but it was to help patients, to ease their suffering. The detectives ask directly, "Did you kill patients?" Long silence. Then Charles says yes. The detectives are shocked. They expected denial. They expected him to lawyer up. They didn't expect a confession. But Charles keeps talking. It's like a dam breaking. He's been holding this inside for 16 years. Now, it's pouring out. He confesses to killing patients at Somerset, at Easton, at Morristown, at all the hospitals going back to Street Barnabas in 1987. The detectives ask, how many? Charles says he doesn't know. 30 or 40, maybe more. He lost count. The detectives ask why. Charles says he wanted to end their suffering. They were sick. They were in pain. He was helping them. But the detectives know that's not true. They've reviewed the cases. Many victims weren't suffering. They were expected to recover. They had families, lives ahead of them. The detectives push. Why did you really do it? Charles can't answer, or won't. He becomes vague. He says he doesn't know. He was depressed. He wanted to die himself. Maybe if he helped others die, it would make sense of his own desire for death. It's not a satisfying explanation, but it's all they're going to get. The interrogation lasts hours. By the end, Charles has confessed to killing at least 30 patients. He's provided dates, names, hospitals, enough for multiple murder charges. December 13th, 2003. Charles Cullen is arrested and charged with murder. Finally, after 16 years and hundreds of victims, his killing spree is over. Chapter 15. The Aftermath. The arrest of Charles Cullen sends shockwaves through the medical community. Hospitals scramble to review their records. How many patients did he kill at our facility? Are we liable? Will families sue? The New Jersey Attorney General's office launches a massive investigation. They form a task force. detectives from multiple jurisdictions, prosecutors, medical examiners. Their job: figure out exactly how many people Charles Cullen killed. It's an overwhelming task. Charles worked at 9 hospitals and 1 nursing home over 16 years. He had access to thousands of patients. Many are now dead and buried. Exhuming bodies is expensive and traumatic for families. The task force focuses on cases where they have the best evidence: medication logs showing unauthorized access, sudden, unexplained deaths, cases Charles himself confessed to. They identify at least 40 probable murders, but they suspect the real number is much higher. Charles himself says he can't remember everyone. It became routine. The deaths blurred together. He thinks maybe 200, maybe 400. He honestly doesn't know. Investigators ultimately conclude that Charles Cullen killed at least 400 patients, making him the most prolific serial killer in American history. More victims than Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and the BTK killer combined. 400 families destroyed. 400 lives stolen. All by one nurse over 16 years. How did this happen? How did the system fail so catastrophically? Chapter 16. Systemic Failure. The Charles Cullen case exposed massive failures in the American healthcare system. Let's break down exactly how this happened. Failure. Hospitals protecting themselves. Every hospital that suspected Charles prioritized liability protection over patient safety. They forced him to resign quietly instead of reporting him to police. They provided neutral references instead of warning future employers. Why? Because admitting they employed a killer would expose them to massive lawsuits. It was cheaper and legally safer to make the problem disappear. This pass-the-trash culture is pervasive in healthcare. Bad employees are quietly pushed out and become someone else's problem. Failure. #2. No mandatory reporting. At the time of Charles's crimes, hospitals were not legally required to report suspected criminal activity by employees to law enforcement. They could choose to keep it internal. The New Jersey Board of Nursing was supposed to track problem nurses, but hospitals weren't required to report disciplinary actions unless there was a criminal conviction. Since Charles was never convicted of anything until 2003, his record stayed clean. Failure. #3. Background checks. When hospitals checked Charles's background, they found nothing alarming. No criminal record. Valid nursing license. Previous employers confirmed employment but said nothing about suspicions or forced resignations. The National Practitioner Data Bank existed but was incomplete. Hospitals didn't always report disciplinary actions, and even when they did, future employers didn't always check thoroughly. Failure. #4. Understaffed hospitals. Charles targeted night shifts in understaffed units. Fewer nurses. Less supervision. More chaos. Easier to go unnoticed. Hospitals cut staffing to save money. This creates an environment where overworked nurses can't adequately supervise each other. One bad actor can operate freely. Failure. #5. Missing medication oversight. Charles accessed medications he shouldn't have. This should have triggered immediate alerts, but medication tracking systems in the 1,990 seconds were primitive. Computerized dispensing was just being implemented. Manual logging was easy to manipulate. Even when discrepancies were noticed, they were often attributed to clerical errors rather than theft. Failure. #6. No pattern recognition. Each hospital saw deaths on Charles's shifts, but didn't connect them because no centralized database tracking suspicious deaths across hospitals. Each facility investigated independently without sharing information. Statistical analysis of nurse-specific mortality rates wasn't routine. Death in ICUs and critical care units is common, making patterns harder to detect. Failure #7. Mental health stigma. Charles attempted suicide multiple times. He was hospitalized for psychiatric issues. He was clearly mentally ill, but hospitals treated his mental health as separate from his job performance. He could be suicidal and still work around vulnerable patients. No one connected his death ideation to potential harm to others. These failures weren't unique to Charles Cullen. They're systemic problems that still exist today. How many other Charles Cullens are out there? How many healthcare workers are harming patients right now, moving from facility to facility, protected by liability concerns and system failures? We don't know. And that's terrifying. Chapter 17. The Legal Proceedings. Charles Cullen's arrest in December 2003 was just the beginning of a complex legal process. Prosecutors faced challenges. They had hundreds of suspected murders but limited physical evidence. Many bodies were cremated or too decomposed for useful autopsies. Medication records were incomplete. They needed Charles's cooperation. So they made a deal. The deal. Charles would plead guilty to murdering 29 patients and attempting to murder 2 others. In exchange, he would receive multiple life sentences, but avoid the death penalty. Additionally, Charles would cooperate fully with investigators. He would help them identify all his victims. He would explain his methods. He would testify if needed. Charles accepted. He didn't want the death penalty. Ironically, the man who killed hundreds of people didn't want to die himself. March 2nd, 2006. Charles Cullen appears in Somerset County Court. He pleads guilty to killing 13 patients and attempting to kill 2 others in New Jersey. The courtroom is packed. Families of victims attend. They want to see the man who killed their loved ones. Charles stands before the judge. He's thin, pale, wearing prison clothes. He looks unremarkable, ordinary, not like a monster. The judge asks if he understands the charges. Charles says yes. The judge asks if he's pleading guilty voluntarily. Charles says yes. The judge asks if he killed these patients. Charles says yes. The families weep. Some shout at him. Why? Why did you do it? Charles doesn't respond. He stares straight ahead, emotionless. The judge sentences him to 11 consecutive life sentences. He will never be eligible for parole. He will die in prison. But that's just New Jersey. Pennsylvania also has charges pending. April 2004. Charles appears in Pennsylvania court. He pleads guilty to murdering 6 patients and attempting to murder 3 others at hospitals in Pennsylvania. The judge sentences him to 6 additional life sentences. More courtrooms, more families, more victims. In total, Charles Cullen receives 17 consecutive life sentences for 29 confirmed murders and 5 attempted murders. But everyone knows the real number is higher, much higher. Investigators believe he killed at least 400 people. That's based on statistical analysis of mortality rates during his shifts, medication discrepancies, and Charles's own estimates. But proving 400 murders is impossible. Too much time has passed. Too much evidence is gone. Bodies are cremated. Records are incomplete. So, Charles is only convicted of 29, but he's responsible for 400. Chapter 18. Victim Families. Let's talk about the families. The people who lost loved ones to Charles Cullen. Many had no idea their family member was murdered. They were told it was natural causes, complications from illness. These things happen. They grieved. They moved on. They never knew the truth. When Charles was arrested and the investigation expanded, families were notified. Police contacted them years after their loved one's death. "We have reason to believe your mother, father, spouse was murdered by a nurse at the hospital." Imagine receiving that call. Your grief, which had finally started healing, is torn open again. But now it's worse because it wasn't natural. Someone did this. Someone killed them deliberately. The families had different reactions. Some wanted to exhume bodies for autopsies, but many victims were cremated. No body means no physical evidence. They'll never know for certain if their loved one was murdered. Some families sued the hospitals. They argued that the hospitals were negligent in hiring and supervising Charles. They should have known he was dangerous. The lawsuits revealed the full extent of the pass-the-trash system. Hospital after hospital admitted they suspected Charles but didn't report him. They prioritized their own liability over patient safety. Families were outraged, betrayed. Their loved ones died because hospitals cared more about lawsuits than lives. Many lawsuits were settled out of court. Hospitals paid millions to families, but no amount of money brings back a murdered parent or spouse. Some families testified at Charles's sentencing. They wanted him to hear what he'd done, to see their pain. One woman, whose mother Charles killed, said, "You took my mother from me. She was going to recover. She was going to come home. But you decided she should die. You had no right." No right. Another man, whose father Charles murdered, said, "I'll never forgive you. Never. You're not a nurse. You're not a mercy killer. You're just a murderer." Charles listened to these victim impact statements. He showed no emotion, no remorse, no reaction. When given a chance to speak, he said, "I'm sorry for what I did. I was trying to help them. I know that doesn't make sense now, but that's what I thought." It was an empty apology. The families didn't accept it. Charles was led away to prison. The families left the courtroom. Their loved ones were still dead. Justice had been served in a legal sense, but it didn't heal the wound. Chapter 19. Psychology of a killer. What makes someone like Charles Cullen? Forensic psychologists and criminal profilers have studied his case extensively. They've tried to understand what drove him to kill hundreds of people. Here's what we know about his psychology. Childhood trauma. Charles had a traumatic childhood. Father died when he was an infant. Mother died when he was a teenager. Possible abuse in the home. Early suicide attempts. This doesn't excuse his actions, but it provides context. Charles grew up feeling powerless, unloved, and suicidal. He never developed healthy coping mechanisms or emotional connections. Depression and suicidal ideation. Charles was severely depressed his entire adult life. He attempted suicide repeatedly. He told therapists he wanted to die. Some psychologists believe Charles was killing patients as a proxy for killing himself. He couldn't successfully end his own life, so he ended others. It was a twisted way of exercising control over death. God complex. As a nurse, Charles had power over vulnerable people. He could keep them alive or let them die. This power was intoxicating. He described feeling like he was playing God, deciding who deserved to live and who deserved to die. This gave his meaningless life meaning. Mercy killing. Justification. Charles repeatedly claimed he was ending patients' suffering. He told himself he was being merciful, but this is clearly a rationalization. Many of his victims weren't suffering. They were expected to recover. They wanted to live. Charles was lying to himself to avoid admitting the truth. He enjoyed killing. The power, the control, the secret knowledge that he was getting away with it. Antisocial personality traits. Charles exhibited classic signs of antisocial personality disorder. Lack of empathy, repeated lying, no remorse for harmful actions, violation of social norms. Impulsivity. He could superficially mimic normal human emotions but didn't genuinely feel them. He understood intellectually that killing was wrong but didn't feel emotionally why it was wrong. The angel of death phenomenon. Healthcare serial killers are sometimes called angels of death. They're a specific type of serial killer with distinct characteristics. They work in healthcare settings, with access to vulnerable victims. They use medical knowledge to kill drugs, equipment tampering. They kill frequently, often dozens or hundreds of victims. They're often caught late because deaths in medical settings are expected. They rationalize killing as mercy or helping. Charles Cullen fits this profile perfectly. He's not unique. There have been many healthcare serial killers throughout history. What makes Charles exceptional is the number of victims and the length of time he operated. Could he have been stopped earlier? Psychologically, yes. If Charles had received proper mental health treatment after his first suicide attempts, if his employers had connected his mental illness to job performance, if he'd been reported to authorities the first time he was suspected, he could have been stopped. But the system wasn't designed to catch him. It was designed to protect hospitals. And Charles exploited that. Chapter 20. Other healthcare serial killers. Charles Cullen is not unique. Healthcare serial killers are a recognized phenomenon. Let's look at some other cases. Janine Jones, Texas, 1,970 seconds. 1,980 seconds. Pediatric nurse. Worked in hospitals and pediatricians' offices. Killed infants and children by injecting them with drugs, causing medical crises. Estimated 60 victims. Only convicted of 2 murders. Currently serving life in prison. Like Charles, she moved between facilities. Like Charles, employers suspected but didn't report her. Like Charles, she claimed she was trying to save the children by creating emergencies and then heroically responding. Orville Lynn Majors, Indiana, 1,990 seconds. ICU nurse. Killed at least 130 patients over 2 years using potassium chloride and epinephrine. Mortality rate in his unit was so high that state health officials investigated. They found death rates spiked dramatically on his shifts. Convicted of 6 murders. Died in prison in 2017. Kristen Gilbert, Massachusetts, 1,990 seconds. ICU nurse. Killed 4 patients and attempted to kill 3 others using epinephrine to induce cardiac arrest. She wanted to impress a boyfriend who was a security guard. She'd cause cardiac arrests. Then her boyfriend would respond to the emergency. And she'd play the hero nurse. Convicted of 4 murders. Currently serving life in prison. Niels Hogel, Germany, 1,999 to 2005. ICU nurse. Killed at least 85 patients using various drugs. He wanted to impress colleagues with his resuscitation skills, so he'd cause cardiac arrests and then try to revive patients. Sometimes he succeeded. Often he didn't. Convicted of 85 murders. Currently serving life in prison. Estimated total victims, over 300. Beverly Allett, UK, 1,991. Pediatric nurse. Killed 4 children and attempted to kill 9 others over 2 months. Used insulin injections. Caused cardiac arrests. Tampered with 4 lines. Convicted of 4 murders. Currently in high-security psychiatric hospital. What these cases have in common. Healthcare workers with access to vulnerable patients used medical knowledge to kill, operated for months or years before being caught. High victim counts. Employers suspected but were slow to report. Psychological need for control, attention. Rationalized killing as helping or mercy. Charles Cullen had more victims and operated longer than almost any other healthcare serial killer. But the pattern is eerily similar across all these cases. The system that failed to stop Charles has failed repeatedly to stop others like him. Chapter 21. Reforms after Cullen. After Charles Cullen's arrest and conviction, there was public outcry. How could this happen? How could someone kill 400 people and keep getting hired? Politicians promised reforms. Healthcare organizations vowed to do better. Some actual changes were implemented. 1. Mandatory reporting laws. New Jersey passed a law requiring healthcare facilities to report suspected criminal activity by employees to law enforcement and state licensing boards. Other states followed with similar laws. Now, if a hospital suspects a nurse is harming patients, they must report it. Failure to report is itself a crime. 2. Better background checks. Healthcare facilities are now required to check the National Practitioner Data Bank before hiring. This database tracks disciplinary actions, malpractice suits, and license suspensions. Reporting to the database is now mandatory, not optional. 3. Improved medication tracking. Computerized medication dispensing systems became standard. Every medication access is logged and time-stamped. Algorithms flag unusual patterns. A nurse accessing drugs they don't need, accessing during off times, etc. These systems aren't perfect, but they're better than manual logging. 4. Statistical monitoring. Hospitals now use statistical analysis to monitor mortality rates by shift, unit, and individual healthcare worker. If one nurse's patients die at significantly higher rates than average, it triggers an investigation. Again, not perfect. 5. Whistleblower protections. Healthcare workers who report suspected patient harm are now protected from retaliation. This encourages nurses to speak up when they notice suspicious patterns. 6. Credential verification organizations. Third-party companies now verify healthcare worker credentials and employment history. They contact previous employers and demand detailed references, not just employment dates. These reforms have helped. We haven't had another Charles Cullen, at least not that we know of. But the reforms have limitations. Hospitals still have financial incentives to hide problems. Reporting a killer nurse leads to lawsuits, bad publicity, and regulatory scrutiny. The temptation to quietly push out a problem employee still exists. And what about hospitals in different states? What about international healthcare workers? The databases don't always communicate effectively across borders. The system is better than it was. But it's not foolproof. How many healthcare serial killers are operating right now? We don't know. And that's the terrifying part. Chapter 22. Charles Cullen. In prison. Charles Cullen is currently incarcerated at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. He's serving 17 consecutive life sentences. He will never be released. He will die in prison. What's his life like now? Prison records show he's been a model inmate. No violent incidents. No disciplinary actions. He follows rules, keeps to himself, doesn't cause trouble. He's housed in a special unit for high-profile or vulnerable inmates. Other prisoners know who he is. A nurse who killed hundreds of sick people. In prison culture, that's despicable. Even murderers have codes. Charles needs protection from other inmates who might want to hurt him for harming vulnerable people. He spends most of his time alone. He reads. He writes letters. He has no visitors. His ex-wife and daughters want nothing to do with him. Over the years, various journalists and documentary filmmakers have tried to interview Charles. Some have succeeded. What does he say? He maintains that he was trying to help his victims. They were suffering. He ended their pain. He was being merciful. When pressed, he admits some victims weren't suffering. He admits he doesn't have a good explanation for why he killed them. He's asked about his mental state during the murders. He says he was depressed, suicidal. Nothing made sense. Killing patients was a way of asserting control when his own life felt out of control. He's asked if he feels remorse. Long pause. I think about them, he says. I think about what I did. I know it was wrong, but that's not the same as remorse. True remorse involves emotional pain, guilt, a desire to undo the harm. Charles doesn't seem to feel that. He's intellectually aware that what he did was wrong, but emotionally, he's hollow, empty. Psychologists who've evaluated him say he exhibits classic antisocial personality traits. He can mimic emotions, but doesn't genuinely feel them. He understands concepts like guilt and remorse academically, but doesn't experience them personally. He's a man without empathy, and that's what made him so dangerous. Will Charles ever be released? No. Will he ever feel genuine remorse? Probably not. He'll grow old in prison. He'll die there, and the families of his victims will never get real closure. Chapter 23. The victims we know. Let's remember some of Charles Cullen's confirmed victims. These aren't just numbers. They were real people with lives, families, and futures. Reverend Florian Gall, age 68, Catholic priest, beloved by his parish, in Somerset Medical Center, recovering from heart surgery, expected to make a full recovery. Charles injected him with digoxin on the 11th of December 2003. He died shortly after. His parishioners were devastated. He'd served their community for decades. He was supposed to come home. Instead, his funeral mass was held. Hundreds attended. They mourned a man who should still be alive. Judge John Yengo Sr., age 72, respected judge in New Jersey, in Street Barnabas burn unit after an accident. Serious burns, but expected to survive with treatment. Charles killed him in 1988 with a drug overdose. One of Charles's earliest victims. Judge Yengo left behind a wife, children, and grandchildren. A legacy of public service. All cut short because a nurse decided he should die. Helen Dean, age 91, sweet elderly woman at Warren Hospital. Routine medical issue. Expected to return home within days. Charles killed her in 1993. Her family never suspected murder. They thought it was just old age. They grieved, naturally. Years later, they learned the truth. Their grief reopened, now mixed with anger and betrayal. Francis Henry, age 84. Veteran. Served his country in World War II. Survived combat. Raised a family. Lived a full life. He was in Easton Hospital for pneumonia. Expected to recover. Charles killed him in 2001. Another veteran who survived war only to be murdered by someone sworn to heal. Jin Kyung Han, age 40. Young woman. Mother. In Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, recovering from complications. Charles killed her in 1998. 40 years old. Her children lost their mother. Her husband lost his wife. All because a nurse decided to play God. James Strickland, age 83. At Somerset Medical Center. Former engineer, brilliant mind, in for routine procedure. Charles killed him in June 2003. 6 months before Charles was finally caught. If Somerset had investigated earlier, James would still be alive. But they didn't, and he died. These are just a few. 29 confirmed victims, 400 suspected. Every single one was a person. They had favorite foods, hobbies, grandchildren. They had plans for next week, next year. Charles Cullen stole all of that, hundreds of times. When we talk about serial killers, we often focus on the killer, the psychology, the methods, the investigation. But we should focus on the victims, the lives lost, the families destroyed. That's the real horror of the Charles Cullen case. Not that one man killed hundreds, but that hundreds of lives were stolen, and for years, no one stopped him. Chapter 24. Could it happen again? The question everyone asks. Could another Charles Cullen happen today? The honest answer: yes. The reforms implemented after his case have helped. Reporting is better. Background checks are more thorough. Medication tracking is improved. But the fundamental incentives haven't changed. Hospitals still prioritize liability protection. If they suspect an employee is harming patients, reporting it to police triggers investigations, lawsuits, publicity, and regulatory scrutiny. It's still cheaper and easier to quietly push the employee out and hope they become someone else's problem. Human nature hasn't changed. Healthcare administrators still make decisions based on risk management, not just patient safety. And healthcare serial killers are rare but not unheard of. The traits that made Charles' dangerous antisocial personality, access to vulnerable people, medical knowledge, still exist in the population. Statistically, there are probably other healthcare workers right now who are harming patients. Not on Charles's scale, perhaps, but harming people nonetheless. We just don't know who they are yet. Warning signs to watch for. If you have a loved one in a hospital or nursing home, here are red flags. Unexplained deterioration. Patient was stable, then suddenly gets worse for no clear reason. Shift patterns. Multiple patients dying on the same nurse's shifts. Medication issues. Missing drugs. Unauthorized medication administration. Resistance to oversight. Healthcare worker who insists on working alone, resists supervision. Personal problems. Severe depression. Substance abuse. Financial troubles in healthcare workers around vulnerable patients. High mortality rates. One unit or shift has significantly more deaths than others. These signs don't prove anything, but they warrant investigation. What can be done? Mandatory reporting must be enforced with serious penalties for hospitals that don't comply. State licensing boards need more funding to investigate complaints. National database of problem healthcare workers needs to be comprehensive and mandatory. Hospitals need to prioritize patient safety over liability concerns. Whistleblower protections must be strong and enforced. Statistical monitoring should be standard at all facilities. Mental health screening for healthcare workers should be routine. Will these changes prevent another Charles Cullen? Maybe, maybe not, but they'll make it harder. And that's worth doing, because right now, somewhere, there might be a nurse or doctor harming patients, moving from facility to facility, hiding behind the system's failures. We owe it to potential victims to do everything possible to stop them. Chapter 25. The wider implications. The Charles Cullen case isn't just about one serial killer. It's about systemic failures in healthcare, criminal justice, and corporate culture. Let's examine the wider implications. Healthcare, industry, culture, The Cullen case revealed that hospitals routinely prioritize profit and liability protection over patient safety. This isn't unique to healthcare, it's common in many industries. But in healthcare, the stakes are literally life and death. When a hospital makes a decision to quietly push out a suspected killer to avoid lawsuits, they're essentially deciding that their financial interests matter more than human lives. This is a moral failing at the institutional level. The cost of silence. Every hospital that stayed silent about Charles Cullen contributed to future deaths. Street Barnabas suspected him in 1992. If they'd reported him to police, then he could have been stopped. Instead, they stayed silent. And he killed for 11 more years. Hundreds more victims. How do you calculate that moral calculus? How do you weigh the cost of lawsuits against the cost of human lives? Apparently, hospitals calculated that silence was cheaper, and they were probably right from a financial standpoint. But morally, it's indefensible. Regulatory capture. State nursing boards are supposed to protect the public by licensing and disciplining nurses. But they're often underfunded and understaffed. They rely on hospitals to report problems. When hospitals don't report, the boards can't act. This is called regulatory capture, when the entities being regulated effectively control the regulators. Hospitals have power, resources, lawyers. Nursing boards don't. The result? Inadequate oversight and dangerous people slipping through cracks. The banality of evil. Charles Cullen wasn't a monster. He looked ordinary. He sounded ordinary. Colleagues described him as quiet, but competent. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. This is the banality of evil. True evil doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look like a horror movie villain. It looks like a tired nurse doing his job. The people who enabled Charles weren't evil either. They were hospital administrators doing what they thought was best for their institutions. They were nurses who noticed something odd but didn't want to cause trouble. They were human resources managers following standard procedures. None of them intended to help a serial killer. But their small decisions to stay quiet, to not investigate fully, to provide neutral references added up to enabling mass murder. Trust in healthcare. Patients trust healthcare workers. We have to. When we're sick or injured, we're vulnerable. We trust that the people caring for us want to help, not harm. The Charles Cullen case shatters that trust. It forces us to confront the reality that sometimes the person who's supposed to heal you might hurt you. This is psychologically devastating. It makes people afraid to seek medical care. It makes families paranoid about hospital stays. And the worst part? That fear is rational. The system that allowed Charles Cullen to kill for 16 years still exists. The incentives that led hospitals to cover up his actions still exist. Trust should be earned. Healthcare institutions haven't earned it. Accountability. No hospital administrator was ever criminally charged for enabling Charles Cullen. No one went to prison for providing him with neutral references after suspecting him of murder. Civil lawsuits were settled with money. Hospitals paid out millions. But money isn't accountability. Real accountability would mean criminal charges for people who knowingly allowed a killer to continue working. It would mean license revocations for administrators who prioritized profit over patients. It didn't happen. And because it didn't happen, the lesson learned by healthcare institutions was, you can get away with this. It'll cost you money, but you won't go to prison. That's not accountability. That's a cost of doing business. Chapter 26. Media coverage. The Charles Cullen case received significant media coverage, but not as much as you might expect for America's most prolific serial killer. Why? Victims weren't sympathetic enough. This sounds terrible, but it's true. Most of Charles's victims were elderly, sick patients. The media and public tend to be less interested in elderly victims compared to young, healthy victims. If Charles had killed 400 children or young adults, the media coverage would have been overwhelming. But elderly ICU patients? The coverage was substantial but not sensational. No dramatic capture. Charles was arrested quietly. He confessed immediately. There was no manhunt, no dramatic chase, no standoff. The media loves dramatic captures. Charles's arrest was boring by comparison. Complex story. The Charles Cullen case is complicated. It involves multiple hospitals, medication protocols, statistical analysis, institutional failures. The media prefers simple narratives. Hero versus villain, good versus evil. The Cullen case requires understanding systemic failures, which is harder to convey in sound bites. Coverage that did happen. Major newspapers covered the case extensively. The New York Times, Washington Post, Philadelphia Inquirer all ran investigative pieces. Several true crime documentaries were made. 60 Minutes did a segment. CBS News produced a documentary. Investigation Discovery featured him in multiple episodes. In 2022, Netflix released The Good Nurse, a film starring Eddie Redmayne as Charles Cullen and Jessica Chastain as the nurse who helped catch him. The film brought renewed attention to the case. But even then, it didn't reach the cultural penetration of other serial killer stories. Why this matters? Media coverage serves a purpose beyond entertainment. It educates the public. It holds institutions accountable. It ensures we remember and learn from tragedies. The relative lack of coverage of the Cullen case means many Americans don't know it happened. They don't know that hospitals can't be blindly trusted. They don't know that pass the trash culture exists. This ignorance makes it easier for another Charles Cullen to happen. Chapter 27. The Nurse Who Caught Him. Let's talk about the hero of this story, Amy Loughran. Amy was a nurse at Somerset Medical Center. She worked with Charles Cullen. They were friends, or so she thought. Amy noticed something wrong. Patients were dying unexpectedly. Medications were going missing. And it seemed to happen when Charles was working. She started keeping informal notes. Dates. Times. Which patients died when Charles was on duty. The pattern was undeniable. But Amy faced a dilemma. Charles was her friend. They talked during shifts. He seemed like a good person. How could he be a killer? But the evidence was there. She couldn't ignore it. Amy reported her suspicions to hospital management. They took it seriously, this time. They contacted police. Then Amy did something incredibly brave. The police asked her to help. They needed more evidence for an arrest. They needed Charles to make mistakes, to say something incriminating. They asked Amy to continue working with Charles, to befriend him, to gather information. Amy agreed. For weeks, she worked alongside a man she believed was a serial killer. She smiled. She made small talk. She pretended everything was normal, all while wearing a wire. The police recorded conversations between Amy and Charles. They hoped he'd confess or say something useful. Charles didn't confess, but the recordings provided background for the investigation. Finally, police had enough evidence. They arrested Charles. Amy's role was done. After Charles's arrest, Amy struggled. She had PTSD from working alongside a killer. She felt guilty should she have realized sooner. Could she have saved more people? She eventually wrote a book about her experience, The Good Nurse, a true story of medicine, madness, and murder. The Netflix movie is based on her story. Amy is a genuine hero. She risked her life to stop a serial killer. She faced her fears. She did the right thing, even when it was terrifying. Without Amy Lochran, Charles Cullen might still be killing today. Chapter 28. Philosophical Questions. The Charles Cullen case raises disturbing philosophical questions about medicine, morality, and human nature. The mercy-killing question. Charles claimed he was ending suffering. In some cases, his victims were terminally ill, in pain, with no hope of recovery. Does that make his actions less wrong? Most people would say no. Even if some victims were suffering, Charles had no right to decide they should die. That's not his decision. It's the patient's decision, or if they're incapacitated, their family's decision. But it raises uncomfortable questions about end-of-life care. Many people die in hospitals in prolonged, painful ways. They're kept alive by machines long after meaningful life has ended. Is there a place for hastening death in medicine? Most medical ethicists say yes, in the context of patient autonomy and informed consent, hospice care, palliative sedation, aid in dying laws in some states. But that's fundamentally different from what Charles did. Those approaches involve patient choice. Charles took choice away. The utilitarian calculus. Some of Charles's victims were elderly, with limited time left. If their deaths were quick and painless, is that better than prolonged decline? This is utilitarian thinking. Judging actions by outcomes. Minimize suffering. Maximize happiness. But this logic is dangerous. It leads to devaluing certain lives. Elderly lives. Disabled lives. Sick lives. If we decide some people are better off dead, we're on a very dark path. Every life has value. Every person deserves to live until natural death. No one should have that choice taken from them. The slippery slope. If we accept mercy killing in some cases, where do we draw the line? Terminal cancer patients? People in persistent vegetative states? Dementia patients? People with severe disabilities? Once we accept that some lives aren't worth living, the boundaries blur. This is why medical ethics so strongly emphasizes patient autonomy. The patient decides, no one else. Charles Cullen obliterated that boundary. He decided hundreds of people should die. He played God, and the result was mass murder. The nature of evil. Is Charles Cullen evil? He committed evil acts. He murdered hundreds of innocent people. That's undeniably evil. But is he as a person evil? Or is he mentally ill, broken, a product of trauma and brain chemistry? This matters for how we think about justice and prevention. If Charles is evil, a moral monster who chose to do wrong, then punishment is appropriate. If Charles is mentally ill, a victim of brain dysfunction, then treatment might be more appropriate than punishment. The truth is probably both. Charles had mental illness, depression, antisocial personality disorder, but he also made choices. He chose to kill. He chose to continue killing. Mental illness explains his behavior. It doesn't excuse it. Can healthcare workers be trusted? After Charles Cullen, can we trust nurses and doctors? The answer has to be yes, with caveats. The vast majority of healthcare workers are dedicated professionals who genuinely want to help people. Charles Cullen is an extreme outlier, but we can't trust blindly. We need oversight, accountability, systems that catch the outliers, before they kill hundreds. Trust, but verify. That's the lesson of Charles Cullen. Chapter 29. Personal Reflections from Those Involved. Over the years, various people involved in the Charles Cullen case have shared their reflections. Detective Tim Braun, lead investigator. I've worked hundreds of murder cases, but Charles Cullen haunts me. The scale of it, 400 people. How do you comprehend that? And the system failures. Every hospital knew or suspected, and they all stayed silent. That's not one bad apple. That's a rotten system. I think about the victims, the families. What if someone had reported Charles in 1,992? How many lives would have been saved? That's the tragedy. This was preventable, entirely preventable. And it wasn't prevented because institutions cared more about liability than lives. Amy Loughran, nurse who helped catch him. I still have nightmares. Working next to him, knowing what he'd done, pretending everything was normal. I thought I knew him. We were friends. Or I thought we were. How could I be friends with someone who killed people? I feel guilty. I should have seen it sooner. There were signs. I ignored them because I didn't want to believe. But I also know I did the right thing in the end. I stopped him. He's not killing anyone anymore. That has to count for something. Family member. Anonymous. Rady. 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 My mother died at Somerset Medical Center. December 2003, right before Charles was arrested. For years, we thought she died naturally. Then we got the call from police. They told us she was probably murdered. We'll never know for sure. Her body was cremated. No way to test for drugs. But the circumstantial evidence is strong. Charles had access. She died on his shift. Her death was sudden and unexpected. I'm angry. At Charles, obviously, but also at the hospitals. They knew he was dangerous, and they let him keep working. My mother might still be alive if someone had done the right thing years earlier, but they didn't, and now she's gone. Hospital administrator. Anonymous. I wasn't involved in Charles Cullen's case directly, but I work in hospital administration. I understand the pressures. When you suspect an employee might be harming patients, you face an impossible choice. Report it and face legal catastrophe, or handle it quietly and hope you're wrong. I'm not defending what happened. Those hospitals should have reported Charles, but I understand why they didn't. The system incentivizes silence. We need to change that. Make reporting the legally safer option. Protect hospitals that do the right thing. Punish hospitals that stay silent. Until the incentives change, this could happen again. Chapter 30. Lessons learned. What should we learn from the Charles Cullen case? For hospitals, patient safety must be the top priority, even above financial concerns. Report suspected criminal activity to police immediately. Don't give neutral references to employees suspected of harming patients. Implement robust statistical common monitoring of mortality rates. Create cultures where nurses feel safe reporting concerns. Take mental health seriously in your employees. For healthcare workers, if you notice suspicious patterns, report them. Don't rationalize away concerns because you like a colleague. Patient safety always comes first. You won't be punished for good faith reports. Legally protected. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. For patients and families, don't assume hospitals are always safe. Ask questions about staff credentials and training. Notice patterns if multiple patients are dying on certain shifts. That's concerning. Report concerns to hospital administration and state health departments. Request autopsies if deaths seem suspicious. Trust your instincts. For policymakers, strengthen mandatory reporting laws. Fund state licensing boards adequately. Criminally prosecute hospital administrators who enable killers. Create federal database of problem healthcare workers. Protect whistleblowers aggressively. Require statistical monitoring of mortality rates by individual healthcare workers. For society, we can't blindly trust institutions. When profit and safety conflict, safety must win. Accountability matters. Consequences for enablers, not just perpetrators. Mental illness is not an excuse for murder. Systems need redesigning, not just individuals punishing. The ultimate lesson. Charles Cullen killed 400 people not because he was an unstoppable monster, but because the system allowed him to operate. Every hospital that stayed silent. Every administrator who prioritized liability. Every neutral reference given. Every missed background check. These weren't accidents. They were choices. Bad choices that enabled mass murder. We can't prevent every serial killer, but we can prevent them from killing for 16 years. We can prevent them from moving from hospital to hospital. We can prevent 400 deaths. We just have to choose patient safety over institutional protection. That's the lesson. Will we learn it? Chapter 31. Where are they now? Charles Cullen. Age 6/5 of 2025. Incarcerated at New Jersey State Prison. Serving 17 consecutive life sentences. Will die in prison. No chance of parole. Reportedly in declining health. Amy Lochran. Lives privately. Wrote a book about her experience. Consulted on the Netflix movie. Advocates for healthcare worker protection laws. Struggles with PTSD, but has found peace. The hospitals. Street Barnabas Medical Center, still operating. Paid settlements to victim families. Implemented new safety protocols. Warren Hospital, still operating. Changed some policies, but faced no criminal charges. Hunterdon Medical Center, still operating. Settled lawsuits. No criminal consequences. Morristown Memorial Hospital, still operating. Part of larger hospital system now. Liberty Nursing Home, closed. For unrelated reasons. Easton Hospital, still operating. Praised for eventually reporting Charles to police. Somerset Medical Center, still operating. Settled lawsuits. No criminal charges. None of the hospitals faced criminal charges. None of the administrators went to prison. Financial settlements were paid. But no one was held criminally accountable for enabling a serial killer. Victim families. Many received financial settlements from hospitals. Money doesn't heal the wounds, but some families used settlements to establish scholarships or charities in their loved ones' names. Some families still advocate for stronger patient safety laws. They speak publicly about their experiences to prevent future tragedies. Many families prefer privacy. They've moved on as best they can. New Jersey Board of Nursing overhauled their reporting and investigation processes. Now more aggressive in pursuing complaints, but still underfunded and understaffed. The healthcare industry. Reforms were implemented, reporting improved, but fundamental incentives remain unchanged. Hospitals still prioritize liability protection. We haven't had another Charles Cullen that we know of. but the conditions that allowed him to operate still exist. Chapter 32. Similar cases after Cullen. Since Charles Cullen's arrest, there have been other healthcare worker murders, proving the problem didn't end with him. Elizabeth Wetlaufer, Canada, 2007 to 2016. Nurse in Ontario. Killed 8 elderly patients using insulin injections. Attempted to kill 6 others. Like Cullen, she moved between facilities. Like Cullen, employers suspected but didn't report immediately. Like Cullen, she claimed she was relieving suffering. Convicted in 2017. Currently serving life in prison. William Davis, Texas, 2017 to 2018. Nurse at Christus Trinity Mother Frances Hospital. Killed at least 4 patients by injecting air into their arterial lines, causing fatal embolisms. Hospital noticed increased deaths on his shifts. They investigated and reported to police relatively quickly. Convicted of murder. Currently serving life in prison. Heather Presti, Pennsylvania, 2023. Nurse at various nursing homes. Charged with killing 3 patients and attempting to kill 19 others using insulin injections. Arrested in 2024. Case still ongoing. These cases prove healthcare serial killers still exist. The Cullen reforms haven't completely solved the problem. Vigilance remains necessary. Chapter 33. The final question. After learning everything about Charles Cullen, his childhood, his crimes, his arrests, the systemic failures, we're left with one haunting question. Why? Why did he kill 400 people? Charles himself doesn't have a good answer. In interviews, he's vague. He mentions depression, wanting to end suffering, feeling powerless in his own life. But these explanations don't satisfy. Many people are depressed and don't kill. Many people feel powerless and don't murder. The truth is probably simpler and more disturbing. Charles Cullen killed because he could. He had access to vulnerable people and lethal drugs. He had the knowledge to kill undetected. He had a system that protected him when suspicions arose. And somewhere deep in his damaged psyche, he enjoyed it. The power, the control, the secret knowledge that he was getting away with it. Maybe that's the scariest part. There's no grand conspiracy, no elaborate motive, no dramatic backstory that explains everything. Just a broken man in a broken system, making terrible choices for 16 years. And 400 people died because of it. Epilogue. Remembering the victims. Let's end, not with Charles Cullen, but with his victims. 400 people. Each one, a complete life. Childhood memories. First loves. Careers. Families. Hopes and dreams. They were grandparents who wanted to see grandchildren grow up. Parents who had more love to give. Spouses who had more years with their partners. Friends who had more laughter to share. Charles Cullen stole all of that. Every future birthday. Every holiday. Every I love you that will never be said. The tragedy isn't that one man was evil. Evil exists. We know this. The tragedy is that the system allowed him to be evil for so long, that institutions prioritized money over lives, that no one stopped him when they could have. The victims of Charles Cullen deserve to be remembered not as statistics, not as America's deadliest serial killers' victims, but as people. People who deserved to live, who wanted to live, who would still be alive if someone, anyone, had done the right thing. Remember them. Remember that healthcare workers can't be blindly trusted. Remember that institutions protect themselves, not you. Remember that when profit and safety conflict, you must choose safety. And remember that 400 people died because hospitals chose silence over justice. Let that never happen again. End.